Hey everybody, another cutting room floor video here, just tackling a couple things we couldn't get to in the final cut of the sermon. Part of this comes from some great questions and conversations I had with folks afterwards. And maybe to get at it, we'll go back to that scene that we referenced in the sermon where John the Baptist is in prison and he sends some of his followers to go to Jesus and ask him the question, hey, are you really the one we were supposed to be waiting for and looking forward to, or should we be waiting for someone else? And I wonder if part of, what's behind that question is, for John, I thought you were supposed to come and deal with your enemies. I thought you were going to come like purge your creation with that refining fire, but here I am suffering at the hands of your enemies, still rotting away in prison, perhaps awaiting my death sentence. There's some disconnect here in what I was looking for. Maybe. I wonder if that's part of the issue for John. Because legitimately that was part of the issue with all the Jewish people, like in embracing this Jesus. Like he was not the kind of king they had been longing for, right? One who was going to come and deal with the enemies, like expunge Rome from Jerusalem and Israel. Right? So it gets at this question. In the sermon, we were talking about this unique glory that belongs to Jesus, and we were coming at it the way sort of Paul does in that passage from the lectionary in 1 Corinthians 1, where he says, we preach Christ crucified. We preach the glory of the King crucified, right? Which was a stumbling block for the Jewish people and was just utter foolishness to the Greeks and the Romans with their conceptions of what kings and gods were supposed to be like, right? So the question then, all right, so okay, we see that unique glory of Jesus, but isn't it true that there's also this part of the future glory of the King that will be revealed where he comes in all of his power and his might, and he deals with the enemies of God, and he, tramples underfoot the winepress of the fury of God's wrath and expunges, the enemies from creation? To which we would say, yes, and or yes, but let's nuance that just a little bit, or clarify, or make sure we see how the New Testament goes at that. So on the first hand, yes, absolutely, right? We talked about this 2 weeks ago, or 2.5, however, when we were looking at the episode with Jesus in the wilderness being baptized by John the Baptist, and we heard that yes, there is one coming who will baptize with fire and with the Spirit, and we talked about a king who is not going to deal with his opposition and who is not going to purge his creation of all that resists the goodness of his kingdom, at least at some point, right? I don't know if that's a king worth embedding your hope in or trusting, because what hope do you possibly have that things will ever be made right if there's never any dealing with the enemies, if there's never any kind of judging of all that is not right? Or we even saw it this past week in that Matthew 25 passage where Jesus says, look, everyone will stand before the King, and the King will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, to inherit the kingdom that was prepared for you, because when I was sick, when I was hungry, when I was a stranger, when I was in prison, you cared for me, you visited me, you welcomed me. And then he's going to say to those on the left, depart from me, because I never knew you, you never knew me, because when I was hungry, sick, naked, poor, imprisoned, a stranger, you didn't care for me. And he says, depart to the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Not the exact wording there, but you get the picture, right? Yes, the King one day will come and deal with the opposition and eradicate that from his creation. So we don't minimize that. But there's this other aspect of it, and I guess my mind goes here maybe to the book of Revelation for some reason. Well, part of the reason is because that's where, it all kind of comes to an head, and we get like a behind-the-scenes look at not only, life in the here and now, but how it all pans out. And there is, in like chapters 19, 20, 21, 19, 20, Jesus dealing with his enemies, the opposition at that point. You have all the kings of the earth gathering their armies, preparing for climactic battle. You have the beast and the dragon, right, working and, all involved in that. And then you see the scene in chapter 19 where the king is coming back, the white rider on his horse in the clouds of heaven, and he's got that sword, which isn't in his hand, by the way. It's coming out of his mouth, and he's got this robe that's already sort of dipped in blood. Okay, so there's all interesting symbolism there. But anyway, either way, like they have this, this great gathering for battle, and the armies of heaven are there with him. And then it's interesting, like you go read those, and then it's just kind of like done. Like we don't get any description of the battle, we don't get any, epic Lord of the Rings, Return of the King, final climactic battle scenes. It's just they prepare, they come, they meet, and then it's done, and it's over. And the dragon and his armies are cast away into that lake of fire. Which is to say, like, the New Testament or Revelation isn't too concerned to show you all that scene. Or I think of, chapter 4 in the book of Revelation, like the beginning part of all that apocalyptic imagery, where John is in the courtrooms of heaven. He sees the throne and he hears a lion, like coming to ascend to the throne, right? He hears this lion. So he turns to see like this ferocious, mighty lion that's going to ascend to the throne. And what does he instead see? He sees a lamb sort of like hobbling along to the throne because he's suffered a mortal wound. So there's all this tension where, yes, Jesus is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and he is going to deal with that. And then, and maybe then when we want to see, that vengeance unfurled, and we want to see like the climactic, like the New Testament just sort of, it doesn't indulge that for us. And what am I saying there other than just to simply say, yes, there is that part of the king aspect of who the king is, and maybe it's part of his glory as well too, where he is going to deal with the opposition, and he is going to come and judge. And with what power he has, he will eradicate from his creation the opposition to his kingdom. But it's like the New Testament, it states that, but then it doesn't like really major on that as the grand display of the glory of the king. And why it's important to highlight that is because I think sometimes in our modern culture, we invert that things. Like when we again, like we talked about in the sermon, our conceptions of glory tend to gravitate towards that grand displays of power and might, and we probably would maybe gravitate more towards that furious trampling of the winepress of God, all that sort of stuff. And the New Testament says, yeah, okay, that's happening, but it constantly wants to bring us back. But the unique glory that belongs to this King and this God in the flesh is Christ crucified. So, do with that what you want. A ton more we can talk about that. That's just maybe a caution there in light of the culture that we live in. Okay, but the other thing that I would just want to highlight too is how you even unpack this in a quick cutting room floor video. There is a unique glory of Jesus that belongs to him in his divinity, and then there is a unique glory of Jesus that belongs to him in his humanity as well too. At some point we're going to have to deal with, or have an extent, maybe this will be a whole separate video, part of the whole aspect of why Jesus is going around saying, yes, now the kingdom is unleashed. It actually isn't because like God has himself come, but it's more that at long last, the true human king, the true son of David, the true, even I could go back, son of Adam, is finally on the ground and is ascending to the throne. Right? God's kingdom was always supposed to be governed by his human kings, and this is all coming to fulfillment. And man, that's a massive theme that we're going to have to unpack at some point. But that's to say that, when we come to the Sermon on the Mount, which is where we were this past week, I think at least part of what the Sermon on the Mount shows us is a glimpse of humanity restored, or a glimpse of what humanity always was supposed to be. And so what it also gives us a glimpse of is, as we were saying, like the heart of the king as he embodies true humanity, or as he shows us what it really means to be human. And so, I would say like the New Testament, again, it maybe even gravitates a little bit more towards that. Like in showing us the glory of Jesus the King, like it's showing us his glory as he is the embodiment of true humanity restored and redeemed, liberated from the power of the cursedness of sin. And why that's important is because in the New Testament especially, that's the glory that we are to both worship and aspire to, right? And that was the other theme through the sermon, that the danger when we have weird conceptions of glory that we impose on Jesus is that we worship that vision of glory and then we aspire to that. And the New Testament always wants to draw us to that unique glory that belongs to Jesus, the human King, as it is resembled in the Sermon on the Mount. And that's why, again, you go back to that lectionary passage in 1 Corinthians 1. Like, as Paul is dealing with divisions and rivalries in the Corinthian church, like from the get-go, he wants to remind them, hey, remember, guys, not many of you were wise and powerful and mighty and strong, but God chose the weak and the foolish things to shame the wise and the powerful. Or he'll say in chapter 2, which we might get at this coming Sunday, when I came to you, it wasn't with power and eloquent words and speech and all this sort of thing, but I came to you in weakness and fear and trembling, so that the power, whatever power is going to be displayed, is God's power, not mine, right? And he's calling them to embody that, right? The heart of 1 Corinthians is, man, you can have all this and that, and you can be true and right, and have all these gifts, but man, if you don't have love, what do you have? And if you have all these divisions going on for one reason or another, whatever you're doing, it's not embodying the body of Christ as it's supposed to be. Which anyway is just to get back to that point that the New Testament the gravity of the New Testament seems to keep wanting to come back to the unique glory that belongs to this King, this Christ crucified, in his humility, in his meekness, in his hunger and thirst for the true righteousness of God and how we relate to one another and creation and our Creator himself, like all embodied ultimately in this radical act of sacrificial self-giving love. That's the glory we're meant to see, to worship, and to aspire to, so that we become living reflections of it. So anyway, I don't know if we answered any of the questions. Maybe just gave a little bit more information to help you as you continue unpacking some of these things yourself and asking questions. So plenty more to talk about. Happy to do that anytime, but there you go. Enjoy. We'll see you on Sunday. Thanks.